then it occurred to me, you know, a note isn't enough, I should call him. So I called him and said, I've sent you a note, but I want you to know, you just absolutely blew our minds, and I was able to one-up Dave Barry because he'd never done half the stuff that we were able to do that week. And he said, well, it wasn't me, it was actually Disney Books who arranged this. It was a former employee of mine named Wendy Lefcon. So I called Wendy Lefcon to thank her for this. And I rambled on and blubbered on about how fantastic it was. And she said, well, what was the best thing you liked about it? And I said, well, the best thing I liked about it was, as a writer, every time we got on an attraction, I realized that there was a beginning, a middle, and an end to every attraction. Some parks, which shall go unnamed, want you to pay money just so they can make you throw up. But this place actually tells you a story every time you get on an attraction. And we rode a couple of them a couple times, and I kept seeing different things. And I think this is because there was a bigger plan for every attraction to tell a story. And she said, well, there is, and there are these people called the Imagineers, which I had never heard of. And they write an 80 to 100-page book that tells the story of every attraction. And then there was a pause, and she said, have you ever thought about writing for kids? And I said, well, you know, I mean, I tell our kids stories at night, but I've never really thought of it in terms of writing books. And she said, we're looking for someone who can create a thriller-like book inside our theme parks where nothing bad can happen. And I said, but thrillers, everything bad happens. And she said, well, that's the problem. Do you think you could do this? And I said, well, I'd love to give it a try. So I started submitting outlines, and the lawyers would reject them. They said, no, you know, you can't have a weapon in the park, you can't have anything bad happen to the kids, no one can sabotage a ride. Basically, there's no way to write a thriller inside Disneyland. And I said, but you're hiring me to do this. Well, I went to a symposium, and the guy who was speaking had a little, like, salad bowl on the desk. And on top of the salad bowl was a little plastic pig. And on our bathroom break, I went up to look at this pig, and I went to pick it up, and my fingers went through it. Because you can buy these on the internet. This was a little daylight imaging hologram. And it looked solid. It looked exactly like the little plastic pig that was down in the bottom of the bowl. And it's all these reflecting, and it pops out of the top. And it isn't like a movie hologram where it's transparent. It looked absolutely solid. And I kept going, oh my gosh. And then I went, wait, what if the kids in my story were holograms? Then how can the lawyers object? And I ran it by them, and they said, that makes it totally safe, go for it. And that was the birth of the Kingdom Keepers. But my problem was the way I wrote my thrillers at the time was I would observe, and I would write, and I would edit. Observe, write, and edit. Observation might be Google, it might be the library. It was always at least going to the place I wrote about. And I was going to write about being in Disney after the park closes. That's what interested me. What happens in those 12 hours when we aren't there? We all know what it's like when we are there. So what happens when we aren't there? And I explained to Wendy Lefcon, who was going to be my editor, that I couldn't do this unless I gained full access backstage after hours. And she said, oh, as if. You know, and that's literally what she said to me. And she said, so I guess this is where we part ways, you know. I said, I guess. And she called me back a month later and said, so I've gotten you a VIP pass that lets you and your family into any of our parks for free around the world. And if you call ahead of time, we will assign an Imagineer to show you into the parks when no one's there. Now can you write the books? And I said, yes! Now I can write the book. So the first time I went, they took me to, and you might have even been on that one. You were early on in all of these. Chris would be part of these tours. But at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, we went to Splash Mountain, Thunder Mountain, Space Mountain, and It's a Small World. And for those of you who've read the books, when I was on Splash Mountain, I was being shown around by this white-haired guy who had been with Disney parks for 30-some years. He had met Walt Disney in the day, and he knew everything there was to know about the parks. And we walked Splash Mountain when it was dry, when it was turned off. Then they turned it on for me. 5,000 gallons a minute runs through that thing, and they let me ride it 5 times by myself, that kind of stuff. It was amazing. But this guy was so knowledgeable. And I had already started writing the books, pre-site research. And I said, you know, there's a guy in my books named Fred, but the more I talk to you, you're really Fred. And I wonder, could I put your name in the book? Do any of you know whom I'm talking about?
Wayne.
Wayne. So the guy's name was Wayne on his thing. So I named him Wayne and in the book. And then, lo and behold, as the books became more and more popular, I got these notes from Wayne saying, you know, these young kids are recognizing my name tag, and they're saying, are you Wayne from the Kingdom Keepers? And he'd say, you're darn right I am. And he'd pull out a map, and he'd say, here, and he'd sign it to them. So for years, Wayne, who worked at Splash Mountain, was a real live Kingdom Keeper. And you can't believe what this did for the series, because what seemed to them a piece of fiction, when they saw that it was a real Wayne, they said, oh, it's all real. So it was an amazing start. It was really amazing.
That's great. Well, tell us a little bit about the series, because there were 7 books.
Yeah, so I wrote one book, and that's all I was going to write, was the one book. And it did okay when it came out. It didn't do fabulously, but it did fine. It did enough that Wendy was excited about, Wendy Lefkow, my editor. And then as it got into it finally came out in paperback, and it got into about year 1 or 2 of paperback, and it was just selling off the shelves as fast as they could print it. And they came back to me and said, you know, would you do some more books? And I said, I've been waiting for you to ask it. It had been like 2.5 years. And I said, so why don't we do a trilogy? I'll do a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they said, great, 3 books, perfect. And then we got going in that. And I was on a Disney cruise, thanks to Chris Ostrander. They've now given me like 8 free cruises on their cruise ships. And I was speaking, Chris organized a dinner for me on that cruise with a whole bunch of muckety mucks. And they said, how are the books going? And I said, well, the problem is that the end of the series wants to be in Disneyland, where it all began. And I had worked with Disney Books to do Disney on Ice, to get the Kingdom Keepers into Disney on Ice, to get them across the United States. Disney on Ice was then a licensee, and they wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow me backstage. They wouldn't allow me to do anything. So at this dinner, I said, so I'm just stuck. I can't get my darn characters to Disneyland. And one of the women said, well, do you know that we do a little transit through the Panama Canal over to the west side of the country? Would you be interested in taking a cruise and putting the Kingdom Keepers on that cruise? And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So they gave my wife and I a free cruise through the Panama Canal. Who doesn't love that? To Disneyland. And they let me backstage of the ships. First, the smaller ships. And then thanks to Chris, they let me backstage on the Dream. And what's the other big one?
Fantasy.
And the Fantasy. And I got to go places where when I was being toured by the executives on the ships in their dress whites, their little things, and the person would be opening this door for me and say, this is so cool, I've been on the ship 7 years, I've never been in here. But they were letting me in there. And those became so big that I called Wendy and said, I can't do this in one book. I'm gonna need 2 books just to get them to Disneyland. And suddenly the series grew to 7 books. So it was a thing that started as 1, and as the research went on, I moved from the Magic Kingdom to the Animal Kingdom, then to Epcot, then to, at that time, it was
MGM.
It was Hollywood Studios.
MGM.
It was MGM, yeah, and then they changed it. And so it's been this just incredible research-based series. All my stuff is inspired by what spooked me in the books, and it grew to this 7-book thing, and then the 7 books have sold millions and millions of copies. Who knew?
And I love the way that it's also generationally come back and back again. You know, like there was the first audience, and then they get over, right? And they help.
Who knew that writing for kids meant your books never ever go out of print?
Right.
There's always another grade of 4th grade or 5th graders, and they teach this in schools around the country. There's one school in Miami that uses it for their full curricula. So they do math as if you're a kingdom keeper within the park and you're having to solve distances or build an attraction. I mean, it's so cool what they do. And it's, you know, it's just been the thrill of a lifetime for me, because I wrote for adults for years. Adults read your book once and find problems with it. Kids read your books like 7 times and adore every word you've written. So writing for kids has just been the thrill of a lifetime.
And then you kind of asked the fans to help contribute towards the end.
Well, I did. I got to the very end of the series when they were going to finally be in Disneyland. And by then I had literally received hundreds, if not thousands of emails, both from mothers and fathers saying, thanks for writing these books. It's the first book that got my kids reading, which is the best email you can ever get. Or just enthusiasts who said, what about this? What if the Kingdom Keepers did? What if they went to outer space? Wouldn't it be Kingdom Keepers in outer space? That's gonna be and I realized it was unfair of me to end the series without my readers, is what happened. So I approached Disney and said, you know, I shouldn't do this alone. It's unfair to my readers if they don't have an input into this. And a startup company at that time had come to me and wanted to publish me and work with me. So Disney ended up hiring that startup, and we created a way for the readers of the Kingdom Keepers to vote on the direction that each chapter should take on a Sunday night of every week. And I would write the entire chapter by Saturday. We would proofread it Saturday night and publish it online on Sunday when they would get the next multiple choice outline. So I wrote it the direction that they wanted it to go. And at the same time, we were soliciting, I would say, you know, write your best description of Maleficent having a meltdown. And we'd get, you know, the first week I think we got 400 submissions. The second week we got 1,500 submissions. It got up to where we were getting something like 11,000 submissions a week. And we had readers all over the place siphoning those down to where I would read the top 50, and then I would pick it, and I ended up putting, I think, the writing of 34 kids right into the book, as they were also helping me write it. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My family didn't see me for 6 months. I think it was 28 or 30 weeks that I worked around the clock, like 18 hours a day, to get this project done. We were gonna stop it short so we could sell books, because they would not know the ending. But at about chapter 38, they stopped contributing. But it was the most fun I have ever had. We had 150,000 kids around the world contribute to the book. And it meant that it was a truly crowdsourced ending to the series. Yeah. So it was a total blast.
Fan sourced, yeah, that was, I remember clearly, you know.
That was a nutty time.
Intense,
it was really intense.
But we've got a lot more to talk about other books, but I also wanted to mention that we, as you know, Walt Disney always said that the parks were never finished. They're always going to be evolving. They'll be changing. They'll be improving. New things.
This is murder.
So, so these books, you can tell them a little bit about, you know, how people would take these and try to reenact the Kingdom Keepers, and they came to you and said, hey, we'd love to think about updating them.
So the fan base likes the books enough that they read them, and then they go with their families. Maybe some of you have done this, but they go through the parks following the Kingdom Keepers to the rides and through their quests and their quizzes and all these things that I've got in the books. And that, let's see, would it have been I guess it must have been the first book in Haunted Mansion. I used the chicken door, which is just past the, you know, that opening scene where you're what's that thing called? I'm spacing out the name.
Stretch room?
Yeah, what's it called? The stretch room. Yeah, right after the stretch room, you're about to get on the ride, and there's an exit. And in the Disney cast member area, that's called the chicken door, that if you're scared, you go through that door. So I used that in the book for the Kingdom Keepers to escape when they were being attacked. Oh. Well, it turned out all these kids started going through the chicken door. and the cast members were reporting it. They're just going on the ride, and they go right down the chicken. They come back around, they go on the ride, and what is this about? And so the Kingdom Keepers got internally within Disney got known for sort of upsetting both security and the cast members, because these kids were asking, "Where's this clue? Where's it? What is that book? You know, what are you doing?" And this went on and on for years until they had me build these quests that it's what's the YES. Youth Educational Services, YES, had me build these quests so that school kids could come in and be kingdom keepers for a day. And that was to take some of the pressure off, they thought, the families and the kids doing this. Well, this continued until 2 years ago. They were still getting hassled, and the cast members were, and the books had aged out. The parks had changed. So now the complaint was, where's this attraction? You know, and they go, oh, we closed that like 5 years ago. So Disney contacted me and said, we need to update these books. The books that are existing are hassling our cast members. So I have been in the process for right through the pandemic and before. For 2 years, I've rewritten the entire Kingdom Keepers series. I just finished book 5 about 2 weeks ago. 4 and 5 will come out in March of this year, ahead of another publication we're going to talk about. And then 6 and 7 and the whole series with the Syndrome will come out in June as a big box set and sold individually. But for me, I never reread my books. I just don't do that because I would want to change everything. And boy, did I want to change everything. So I've changed everything. But I've had a total blast.
Oh, that's great. Well, good. Well, that's the Kingdom Keepers, and afterwards you came back with the Return series.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit about
that. Walt's, you know, I kept getting told by the Walt Disney Company that Walt's dream for Epcot had originally been a community. That there would be people living around it and working in it, and working with it, and then being entertained by the park itself. And that, and we've all seen I think they're all over Disneyland and Disney World, the sort of blow-ups of the imaginative structure of this thing. It looks kind of like a big flower. And I thought, you know, as an ode to Walt, I would make that place real. And I've done that in the 3rd series, but to get them to that, I felt the real thing I had to do was go back to opening day. And all of you have probably read about opening day, which was a complete collapse. And they did a beautiful job to where every review loved it. But internally, everything that could go wrong, including women's high heels in the day, sticking in the fresh asphalt, and then pulling out of their shoes and leaving their shoe in the asphalt, everything was going crazy. And I thought, I've got to write a series about that. So that's the Kingdom Keepers Return. And then the 3rd series, which starts, the first book comes out in March of this year, is this one about Epcot and sort of a futuristic look at what might have happened had Epcot been a village and the Kingdom Keepers had had children. So it's called The Kingdom Keepers Inheritance.
Awesome. That's great. Well, you've written some other books for Disney, I know, and you mentioned Dave Barry. Love to hear the story about how that ended up on Broadway. So tell us a little bit about some of the other books.
We all, if we're smart parents, we all read to our kids. And Marcel and I certainly read to our kids. And I was reading Peter Pan to my daughter, our daughter, Paige. And on about page 5, she put her hand across the book and said, "Hey, Dad, how did Peter Pan meet Captain Hook in the first place?" And I'm a writer, so I'm always looking for ideas. And my little writer's light went off, and I went, you know, how come he flies? Why does he never grow old? Where did Tinkerbell come from? All these things, and I just dumped her out of my lap. And I ran to my office, and I started taking notes, and I said, there is a story about how a young boy becomes Peter Pan. And I could write that story. And I went down to play a show with this crazy rock band, and I was staying at Dave Barry's house. And he said, you know, what projects are you working on? I told him about some of the thrillers I was writing. And I said, you know, our daughter asked me this question, how did Peter meet Captain Hook? And I think there's a book there. And his eyes kind of flared. And I went, Dave, you write booger jokes for a living. And I kill people for a living. What if we could write a funny, suspenseful book about how a kid became Peter Pan? And he sort of slapped the kitchen table and said, I'm in. And we had no idea what we were doing. We thought we would write a book, this is honest to God's truth, we thought we would write a book that was about 80 pages long. We would go have it copied at Kinko's. Dave would keep 2 copies for his kids, I would keep 3 or 4 for our kids, and that would be that. And so we started out into this process, and we loved writing it. We had a blast. We outlined it. That was a word Dave had to look up in the dictionary, but we did outline it. And we started writing it. It was going great, and I was working on Kingdom Keepers with Disney. And in one of my phone calls, Wendy Lefcon said, you know, what else are you doing? And I said, well, Dave Barry and I are writing a prequel to Peter Pan for our kids. And she said, you're what? And I said, we're writing a prequel to Peter Pan. And she said, you know, we are Peter Pan. This is Disney. I need to see this book. And I said, well, it's public domain. I mean, we can write. No, she said, it's not about the legal thing. I just want to see this book. So I sent her like 5 chapters. Before we had even finished this book, Disney had bought the book. And it turned out to be a 550-page book. It turned out our outline was a little longer than the 80 pages we had planned. But it became a published book. Who knew? I mean, Dave and I never intended it as that. And it went on to the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 50 weeks. It went to grow into a series of 5 books. Dave and I ended up writing 12 books together over 10 years for Disney. And then Disney Theatrical said, you know, this J.M. Barrie's story started as a play, Peter Pan. Maybe we should make this into a play. And they did, and they let me watch the process for the 6 years it took to do it. The play went off Broadway, got the best reviews anything had ever gotten, sold out all the way through its run. They moved it to Broadway. It got another great review that nobody had ever gotten. Then it went up for 9 Tonys. It won 5 of them. And we're celebrating its 10th anniversary next year. And it's currently, and has been for 5 years, the 3rd most produced play in America. Woo! So it's just been this unbelievable. Thankfully, Dave and I had nothing to do with the writing of the play. It was written by Rick Ellis, who did Jersey Boys, or it would have been the worst thing on earth. Thanks to Rick, it turned out great.
Awesome, that's great. Well, you've got some projects coming up that you're working on. I know we talked about, you've got the new series coming out in March, which, by the way,
Book 1 of Inheritance.
Yep, and I wanted to ask, have any of you ever gone to see Ridley do a book signing here down at Disney Springs, downtown Disney? So you may remember he had lines to the parking lot. I remember one day, one of them, he was signing so many. We usually do them for an hour. We decided to extend to 2 hours, and I think you went 3.5 hours. You said towards the end, hey, does anybody have an ice bucket? Because,
no, we didn't. We put my hand
true
in the
story, and anyway, just so
readers in the
wonderful.
world, you guys are. So.
Well, he's coming back in March because of Inheritance will be
Right.
coming back, so that series will kick off, and we're very excited about it right around Flower and Garden Festival.
Right.
But then next October, you've got some cautionary tales.
Disney came to me about 2 years ago now and said, we want to do a series of short stories that use Disney backgrounds or iconic Disney characters, but put a scary spin on them. And would you write that book for us? I said, yes, I will write that book for you. So it's called Cautionary Tales. It's 8 or 9 short stories. It's illustrated by the incredible Abigail Larson, who's just unbelievable. And Disney's going to release it just before Halloween in 2022. So I should be back for Cautionary Tales then. You know, I'm not a huge fan of short story collections. I mean, I like them, but it's hard to write them. And so what I've done is I've written 8 short stories, and then I've written what we call a through line. So there's a narration story that actually connects all 8 of them. So it reads kind of like a novel with 8 very different chapters. But I hope some of them will scare you, and I hope some of them will make you laugh. But it was such a fun project. My editor was a Disney editor named Lauren Berniak, and she should be Lauren Brainiac, because she's just one of the best editors I've ever worked with. And I think it came out really, really well, and I'm super excited about it.
Awesome. Cannot wait for that.
Yeah,
That's gonna
I'm
be
really
great.
stoked about that.
And then you've shared, there's news that you've got more books beyond that, it sounds like.
Yeah, so everything was quiet through the pandemic, and I thought, oh, Disney's forgotten about me. I really did, because I had pitched some fun. I wanted to write something for sort of grades 1 through 3, somewhere in there, because that's never my area, and that would sort of help fill out what I do with Disney. And so I had pitched this series called Magical Map, and I'll just let your own memory or your own imaginations take care of that.
Yeah.
And then I didn't hear anything about Magical Map. And then they called back just recently, about 2 months ago, and they've hired me to write 8 books. So 6 of them are Magical Map, a few more inheritance books. So they've got me busy for about 3 years here, and I'm just stoked. So there will be a lot more coming in the years to come.
You will be hearing from Ridley Pearson for sure.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
So you needed one of those airbags on the plane.
Great. Well, I'd love to spend a little time if anybody out in the audience might have a question or two. Is there anybody out in the back?
Hello, my name's Steven.
Good.
I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan. I guess, what was your conversation with him when he was developing the Disney Plus Kingdom
I
Keepers?
spoke to Kevin. I was thrilled that he was maybe developing it, and then he and Disney Plus parted ways.
Yeah.
So it never got very far, but it was so funny and so bright. And I thought, wow, this would be a great marriage. And then, that's film, it didn't work out. But yeah, I'm a big fan too.
Is there any possibility someone else would do it, or with you?
There's always a possibility.
Yes.
And I'm never allowed to say anything.
I gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.